providing the unvarnished truth. It's the Capitol Hill Show with Tim Constantine.
Hi, everybody. It's Tim Constantine with you on the Capitol Hill Show. You know, with the awful story coming out of Brussels this week, I think maybe the most disturbing part is that they have stumbled across, and maybe that's an unkind way of saying it, but they have found what they believe to be a bomb-making factory, for lack of a better term. In someone's residence, they were actually making these bombs. They found enough explosives to create maybe as many of 90 of these vests that the guys were wearing at the Brussels airport. So this tells you that, well, this isn't a one-time thing. They are looking to do as much damage as they can. And the questions have been, how do we handle this? What do we do to improve our situation, both here in the United States and over in Europe? How do we make sure we do the best we can to protect ourselves against attacks? Joining me right now is Brian Mast. He is retired from the United States Army. He was a bomb tech with the Joint Special Operations Command, spent his days trying to find the IEDs. Oh, my heavens. And, well, he dismantled a ton of them until the last one. And he had a tragedy himself, lost both of his legs. But it has not slowed him down. He is doing all kinds of good work here in the United States, including running for the United States Congress. Brian, thanks for taking some time with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, let's talk about the creation of these. How difficult is it to create? When we talk about the guys in Belgium buying whatever it is that is required to put together these explosive devices, how difficult is that? How much of a learned skill is that?
Well, there's certainly some learning that you have to do it, and another way to easily say this is you have to have the stones to do it as well. If you're playing with something that's going to explode, you know, you got to have a little grit inside you to start playing with it. And in that, though, you can find an extensive amount of recipes on the internet for various homemade explosives. You can find direction on the internet for how to put together the different components needed to make a full-up device. You know, that being some sort of detonator, some sort of main charge explosive, and some sort of switch to actually get it to go from being a device that's not exploding to a device that actually explodes, what people speculate on these devices being a dead man switch.
All right, now, and talk about that. Talk about the dead man switch, because a lot of focus in the media this week was on the gloves. Each of the gentlemen in the Brussels airport were wearing a black glove on left hand. Talk about that detonator switch and the dead man switch.
Well, the way that you get a device to detonate, that's really the most creative part about bombing, because it doesn't really matter which explosive you're using. What matters is how you get that device to go off without anybody else knowing that that device is going to go off. You know, it could be via a cell phone, it could be via some sort of timer, or as these guys as very likely speculated with a dead man switch, a switch that was in their hand that should they release the pressure off of that switch, that it detonates. And so therefore, if you were to take the target out and the target releases pressure on the switch, then the device is going to go off no matter what. And that obviously creates a pretty big hazard for law enforcement that might look to put a bullet in them.
This serves two purposes, really. For those who might back out at the last minute, if somebody goes in there and all of a sudden their own mortality flashes before their eyes and they think, whoa, I don't want to do this. Well, the guider, the guy who's bringing them in, can have some impact on that if he gives them a little nudge and their finger slips off the switch. And also, as you point out, if law enforcement tries to put a bullet in them, guess what? Their finger, the pressure comes off, and that bomb still explodes.
That's exactly true. But, you know, the makeup of these devices is something that's particularly concerning for law enforcement as well. What we've seen, not just with these devices, but with the devices coming out of Paris as well and others throughout Europe, is that they were made with an explosive called TATP, a very common homemade explosive. That stands for triacetone triperoxide. It's made out of just a couple of chemicals that people in the Western world can certainly find pretty readily. But with this explosive, it's so sensitive that if you were to shoot somebody that was wearing a suicide vest made out of TP, unless you put the bullet in their head, if you put that bullet center mass you're going to detonate that device.
All right. So, and let's talk about the two different things they had there. We talked about vests, where there's obviously an explosive there, but they were also pushing suitcases, and there's speculation as to what was in those suitcases.
That's exactly right. Well, from what I've heard, it's very possible that some of what they found in that bomb-making factory are some full-up devices that they didn't take with them, and it's speculated that these suitcases could have contained as much as 30 pounds of TATP, 30 pounds of that homemade explosive inside of them. And if that's the case, that is a very large yield of homemade explosives.
Put that in some sort of terminology that we can understand. 30 pounds can do how much damage?
Well, when you're talking about a device that's inside of a building, you're talking about 4 walls, a concrete floor, a low-hanging ceiling, you're absolutely going to amplify the effects of that explosive device when you're putting something inside versus outside. And I think all of us have seen the images of the destruction that went on inside of those facilities. But, many pieces of military ordnance could contain a large piece of military ordnance, could easily contain, 30 to 40 pounds of explosives inside of it, something that you could compare to being fired out of a tank.
Now, there's been speculation that there is enough for as many of 90 of these vests out there, and of course we've been told that there are hundreds of folks that have now infiltrated Europe with the intent of doing harm. So how do we defend against this? Earlier I talked about how if you told me in my neighborhood someone was going to detonate a bomb, I wouldn't be able to find it. There are all kinds of houses, there are all kinds of places. But when you take that and your neighborhood is literally the entire world, how do we go about tracking these folks? How do we provide the maximum protection possible?
And that's the important question. Number one, with this terrorist attack, were there red flags? And we can see, absolutely, there were red flags. We were looking at the video, most people across the world saying, wow, there's these 3 individuals walking through the airport, 2 of which are wearing a single black glove. There's a little bit of something that's suspicious there. And that points really to what I think is one of the main pieces of security infrastructure that should be put in place. It's something that does exist to some degree here in the United States of America, but could certainly be more robust. And that is to say the behavioral detection part of what we're looking at as a layer of security. That's used extensively in Israel, but the way that we could be using that here in the United States could be much more effective.
It's interesting looking at different parts of the globe and how security is handled. I intentionally flew through Lagos Airport in Nigeria shortly after the shoe bomber had attempted his little tricks here in the United States, just to see what security was. And at that point, they had beefed it up some. But even then, it wasn't the same as the United States. It wasn't the same as other parts of the globe. But here in the U.S., we have a fairly rigorous process. But I always think when I go through, and this is different cities seem to have different personalities. When I go through Baltimore, for example, and I don't want to pick on Baltimore, but I'm going to, and I apologize to the TSA officers there who are sure to take me for a full frisk down next time. But when I go through Baltimore, they're not friendly. B, they're not very attentive. C, they got a lot of side conversation going on amongst the TSA officers. That's all right. We'll come back. They've got a lot of side conversation going on about their social life, about their boyfriends, girlfriends. I feel like they are not particularly attentive. There are some cities where I feel like I'm getting a little more for my money, but there are distinct places where that's not the case. How do we improve our protection here in the United States?
And there's no question, right? You're going to see a different level of attentiveness with different individuals, and that's not something that we want to say, but that's the human nature aspect of what we're talking about. Some people are going to be more professional than other people, and that's one of the big holes that I actually see in the security apparatus of TSA, and this is probably something that not a lot of people know about, but as it pertains to the hiring process that goes on with TSA, you see so often the individuals that are hired on as security screeners, they're not security professionals. These are people that were holding other jobs having nothing to do with security prior to going to work with TSA. And I think what you need to see put in place is that especially these more important positions, the person that's, say, a canine handler or the person that is tasked with behavioral detection, that you make sure you're hiring the right people for the job and not just the most convenient people for the job. The right people for the job look like this. You have hundreds of canine handlers coming out of the military every single month. Those should be the individuals that are hired on, that have actually seen real terrorists overseas hired on as canine handlers for TSA. You have guys from psychological operations in the military, thousands of them retiring from the military every single month. Those should be the individuals that are hired as behavioral detection officers, guys that have actually seen terrorists on the battlefield and truly know what to look for, not somebody that's given the job because they already work for TSA.
Well, and if you talk to anybody who's seen combat, anybody who's been in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and some of the places that you were, there's an antenna, I call it. There is an awareness around them that sometimes interferes in their social life. Truthfully, I've got a good friend and his wife worries because he is on red alert all the time, but he's been wired differently because of his experiences. But I think if they are in a security position, that's a good thing. If you've got the men and women who have served overseas and they come back and they have that antenna up and they are more aware than somebody who has been working at Burger King, isn't that the person we want?
You better believe it. You made the exact perfect point. The fact of the matter is, our country has been at war for the last 15 years. And while that's unfortunate to say, that is a major asset in the individuals that we have that are trained at a very high level to combat the kind of threats that we're facing. And we need to take those individuals and put them in the appropriate security roles. And this is another one of those places that you can say, yeah, this is one of those places that we need to take vets and hire them. Because regardless of what they did on the battlefield, they do have that internal compass inside of them to say, yeah, something here isn't right. And those are the right people for that job.
Brian, before I let you go, let's talk about your run for the United States Congress. Tell me what made you think, you know what, I want to do this.
Well, I started thinking about running for Congress. Actually, this was after I lost 2 legs and a finger in Afghanistan, and I was laying in a bed up in Walter Reed Army Medical Center at a much more emotional time in my life. And I was telling my wife, Brianna, as she was holding our 6-month-old son at the time, I just don't know how I'd go through life and have the best example that I ever set for that little boy to be that was something that was in my past, or the best defense that I've ever given our country be something that's in my past. I didn't know how to do it. And that's where I came to the conclusion, ultimately, for the best that I give this place to be in front of me, it would be on the battlefield of Washington, D.C. And I really believe in my heart that this is going to be a more important battle than any that I've been a part of previously.
You're in a tough district that you're running in down there in Florida. It's roughly a 50-50 split. It's not exact, but roughly a 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans. Alan West held that seat at one point. But I've got to think, and you tell me if this is right, but I've got to think military issues, homeland security issues, those cross all political boundaries. It's not as though one party is hoping it can protect us and the other party doesn't. With your background, with your expertise, with your knowledge, with your experience, I've got to think that appeals to a broad spectrum. Doesn't matter whether Democrat or Republican.
Everybody wants to feel safe. Nobody wants to have to worry about their kids out in the community, or about going out to a movie theater, or about going to the 4th of July parade or the Memorial Day parade. Nobody wants to have to worry about these things. And that's where it becomes vitally important in the world that we're living in, that we put people in place that have that experience. My experience was as a bomb technician in our highest level of military special operations. And after that, it was experience with the National Nuclear Security Administration and with the ATF and with the department under the Department of Homeland Security, working as an explosive specialist. This is very specifically counterterrorism. That is part of my expertise, and people can learn about that, of course, on my site. It's mastforcongress.com. But I think it's very important for what's going on in the world today.
Mastforcongress.com. Brian, thanks for taking the time with us today. Thanks for the service to your country, and good luck in your congressional race, my friend.
I'll look forward to the next time.
All right, take care. God bless.
Take
That
care.
is
God
Brian
bless.
Mast, literally an American hero. That guy is great. We'll talk with him again, I'm sure. Pete, you'll arrange that one. All right, I'm Tim Constantine. This is the Capitol Hill Show.